Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Sebastian Lodemann Memorial Lectures on Regulating General-Purpose AI Systems. Today, we gather to honor the memory of a remarkable member of our community who passed away in an accident a little over a year ago. Sebastian was a multidisciplinarian with broad intelligence and a ton of curiosity. He was a Lufthansa pilot, an engineer, and a consultant. For EA projects, he worked, among other things, on biorisk and PPE, AI governance, career transition, and meta EA strategy. The main thing we want to say to those who have not met him is that, in spite of how incredibly talented he was very humble, always mentoring people and always volunteering his time. In fact, he was a volunteer at several EAG conferences. A colleague once reflected, "I've never worked with someone whose humility matched such immense intelligence and effectiveness." He was known for his generosity and mentorship, always ready to offer guidance and support. One mentee shared, "Sebastian was a mentor who truly touched my life. The greatest lesson he taught me was to believe in myself." His open-mindedness and genuine curiosity were evident in his approach to complex challenges. He encouraged others to explore new ideas and perspectives, fostering an environment of collaboration and innovation. Balancing personal and professional life with grace, Sebastian demonstrated that dedication to one's work need not come at the expense of personal relationships and well-being. In a recent EA forum post, we collected more lessons that people learned from Sebastian. I'll share the link in the chat. The reason we chose the topic of general-purpose AI system governance for his memorial lecture is that it was something he was passionate about and was working on just before he passed. He had regular meetings with German members of parliament to educate them about general-purpose AI systems, and he was about to start a new consultation on the topic with Claire, who's one of the speakers for the Canadian government. Today, as we gather to explore the regulation of general-purpose AI systems, we continue the conversations that Sebastian was so passionate about. These lectures reflect his vision for a future where technology serves humanity. By bringing together experts and former colleagues, we hope to honor Sebastian's legacy and advance the critical dialogue he so valued. In this session, 3 speakers will share their insight into the regulation of GPAIS, each contributing a unique perspective on this pressing topic. Claire Boine will begin by providing an overview of the current landscape of GPAIS regulations. Céline Castets-Renard will then delve into the EU's GPAIS Code of Practice. Finally, Richard Mallah will address a missing element in the GPAIS regulation. Sebastian believed deeply in the power of collaboration and the exchange of ideas to solve humanity's greatest challenges. It is fitting that these lectures bring us together to engage in precisely the kind of thoughtful, impactful discourse he cherished. Thank you for joining as we celebrate Sebastian's memory by continuing his mission. Let us take inspiration for his work and strive to make meaningful contributions to this essential field. Let us begin. Before I start, I also want to say we won't be able to have any Q&A session due to the 3 lectures we have. Our first speaker is Claire Boine. She's a postdoctoral fellow at WashU School of Law, specializing in AI law and policy. She's a co-founder and CEO of Successive, a nonprofit supporting mid-career professionals in transitioning to impactful roles in AI safety and governance, where she also worked with Sebastian. Claire authored the first article addressing the regulatory loophole of general-purpose AI systems in the AI Act and has since published extensively on the topic while advising 3 governments on GPAIS regulations. Her expertise offers a comprehensive foundation for understanding the challenges and opportunities in regulating general-purpose AI systems, which you will explore in today's lecture. Please, Claire.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this talk. I'm going to really try to give you a broad overview so that you have enough foundations to understand the next 2 talks. So the next 2 talks will go much more into detail and specifics, one on the EU GPAIS Code of Practice and the other one on risk mitigation. But here I really want to talk to especially the non-law people in the room to give them a broad overview as to what GPAIS regulations currently are. And then at the end, I will share some lessons that I learned advocating for GPAIS safety regulations in the past few years that I think will be useful to the community. So first off, what does general purpose mean? Today we're talking about regulation, and so GPAIS in this context has a specific definition, a specific meaning that is different from when we talk broadly. So it does not mean AGI. I want to emphasize this. And it's also different from general purpose technology, like we think about electricity, for instance, as the general purpose technology. In this context, though, the term general purpose came about in the context of AI product safety law. So for the non-lawyers in the room, the EU has jurisdiction over things that affect the internal market. So as you know, European countries each have their own domestic laws, but they've come together in this mostly economic union, which is the EU. And as a result, the EU has power to enact legislation, directives, regulations, when it affects the market, the internal market, because the goal is for people and goods and services to circulate, and the borders are open. So it would be similar in the US to how federal law is usually based on interstate commerce, same in Canada. And so in the EU, there is a lot of product safety laws. And the reason for this is that, of course, if you have a producer who intends to sell their product in EU countries, they don't want to have to like comply with 27 different legislations. That would be crazy. So you need to harmonize those. And this is mostly the basis for the EU AI Act, which is the first ever comprehensive regulation of AI in the world. Lawmaking takes time, so between the first draft in 2021, its adoption earlier this year, the EU AI Act has evolved a lot. But the EU AI Act is based on product safety, and so you can think about this in terms of different safety requirements based on different purposes of a product. For instance, if you sell, say, construction material, or you produce construction material, you will have to comply with different safety requirements based on whether your construction material is meant to be used outside or inside, based on whether it's meant to be used in areas with higher safety, with higher fire hazards, etc. Same with, say, toys. A toy that is meant for a child who is an infant doesn't have to comply with the same safety requirements. Usually it has more than a toy for older children, etc. So the first version of the AI Act had different safety requirements based on the intended purpose of the system. And of course, that didn't make sense, especially in the context of generative AI and chatbots and foundation models. And so the EU AI Act evolved a lot during its making process to include GPAI. And in the end, there was a lot of debate. And then in the end, it's regulating GPAI models actually and not systems. And the goal with this is to really put the responsibility onto the initial providers, like say OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, etc., for those to be the first ones to have to comply with those safety requirements. So a GPAI model is defined as a model that is trained with a large amount of data and using self-supervision at scale that displays significant generality and is capable of competently performing a wide range of distinct tasks. So this is the EU AI Act definition. And there are some different requirements based on different GPAI models. Just so you know, if another entity decides to deploy a GPAI model into their system and kind of embed that into their own system, they become a downstream provider, so they also have to comply with the requirements. But of course, they're not the ones who train the system, etc. So most of the requirements will still have to be complied with at the initial level, right? But then they also have the same requirements full onto them. I'm going to share quickly the requirements with you. and then we will talk about lessons learned. So first off, all GPA models have to have two things. One is a set of technical documentation. So they're mostly of two types. One type of technical documentation is actually for the AI office, which is a body created by the AI Act, to check for compliance in case there is an issue. Another type of technical documentation is actually for downstream providers to be able to comply with the requirements. So say OpenAI has to write a lot of technical documentation on how they trained the model, when to do the training data, I think there's also the computing, well, there's some things about computing power, there's something about the impact on the environment, and so they have to write all this down so that the downstream provider have this information. Another set of requirement is around transparency. So you have to publicly disclose some information about your training data, and there is a reservation of rights, which is a right specific in the EU. To content creators. So say you're an author and you've published articles and books, you have the right to ask providers of GPAI that they do not use your data, your work in the training data. There are also obligations for providers of generative AI, and it's mostly labeling. So they have to make sure that the outputs of the model are marked and detectable as artificially generated or manipulated. Okay, and then we get to what I think will interest you most, the obligations for providers of GPA models with systemic risk. So systemic risk is defined in the AI Act as risk specific to high impact capabilities of GPAIs. So that's really interesting because that's a new class of risk created just for GPA models. And the reason for this is that GPA models can be embedded into so many applications that if they cause a specific harm, you can expect trickle-down effect. And it's defined as being a risk on public health, safety, public security, fundamental rights, or society as a whole. How do you declare that GPAI models has systemic risk? Well, first off, the EU Commission will have the power to decide, based on different criteria, that a specific model should be put on that list. But also, interestingly, if a model was trained on accumulated amount of compute that is above 10 to the 25 flops, it is presumed to have systemic risk. And so here we're getting into the obligations for providers of GPAI models with systemic risk. I think these are really interesting. There is one a requirement to evaluate the model using state-of-the-art protocols and tools, including adversarial testing. A systemic risk assessment, and then you have to have a risk mitigation plan that you disclose to the AI office. There's a requirement to document, track, and report serious incidents and take corrective actions, and the corrective actions you've taken to the AI office. Yeah, so just so you know, the previous disclosures are if the AI office asked, but this one is actually mandatory. If there is a serious incident, you report it when it happens. And then the last one is that AI models and their physical infrastructure must have adequate cybersecurity protections. I want to praise the AI safety committee for these because I know that many people, some people who are attending this lecture, some people who are not but are part of this community have dedicated hundreds of hours in advocacy to make sure that there would be some risk mitigation requirements in the AI Act for GPAI models. So I want to say this is a huge win, and this is something to celebrate. And this regulation, as it's been enacted, will be in place, in force in less than 2 years. So congratulations to everyone. And I also want to add some lessons learned so that we can do better next time. Also want to point out that this is a difficult time for AI governance. Another piece of law that was about to integrate GPA models was IDA in Canada, but it is expected to fail as it has been introduced by the Liberal government. But we expect an election in Canada soon, and we expect the Conservatives to win this election, and we expect the Conservative government to drop IDA. So, I mean, this is a lot of ifs. Of course, it's speculative, but this is probably what will happen. In the same speculative way, Joseph Biden in November 23 adopted a US executive order that also imposes some requirements and some and also some soft law standards onto AI systems, and was actually including GPA models, and was including also models with systemic risk above a certain flop threshold. This executive order is expected to be repealed by the upcoming Trump administration because they have indicated their willingness to do so. So the EU AI Act may actually be the first piece of legislation in the West, and maybe the only one dealing with GPAIS for a while. And now time for lessons learned. So as I highlighted, I think we did a good job in terms of making sure that GPA models were included, and in terms of making sure that big companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, etc., would have to comply with risk mitigation requirements. Some things I think we could do better. One, policymakers are now really concerned, especially on this side of the Atlantic in the US, about chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risk from AI systems and threats to national security. So I think they're focusing a lot on misuse and criminal uses of AI. I think we may have overstated the bio risk, frankly, overestimated from the latest publication on the topic. I mean, it might be that those risks are very serious in a few years from now, but as of now, I think the latest research points to us having kind of overemphasized it, and I think it may have been to the detriment of misalignment risk, which are not talked about very much these days, at least to my knowledge, among policymakers. I think we haven't been really good at articulating threat models for automated R&D. Right now, there is a ton of money poured into the industry to develop agentic AI systems so they can carry out fully autonomous research. And I think we haven't been really good at articulating the different risks stemming from that. In the same way, I think we haven't been really good at articulating threat models for misalignment. Here I want to praise Meter, formerly called Archivals, for their studies, because I think especially the TaskRabbit example was extremely useful in getting the general public to understand misalignment risk. And in fact, this study was even cited by Barack Obama. I think other work like Victoria Kraknova's specification gaming database and articles and her collaborators were also really useful in that. But I think we're missing the step between it's easy to understand how different systems can be misaligned, especially with RL, but we're missing the step between this and the harm. And I think there should be more research on this, more publications on this, especially the ones that can appeal to the general public and are easy to understand and not too technical. And finally, I think we've been especially bad at communication at times. And I want to give two examples, having worked myself on this issue. The word risk is not very politically salient, it's very industry friendly, I'm going to say, because a risk is usually something you accept against a benefit, something you mitigate. It's different from talking about harms or hazards. And so maybe we've been a bit complacent with the industry without realizing so by talking about AI risk. In the same way, AI safety is not a very efficient way to communicate about AI harms. In fact, there's a lot of research, especially in public policy that shows that safety is not something people really care about because it seems something really long term and like workplace safety, or like it's something preventive. It's very different from talking about security. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to introduce Céline in a minute, but I want to say we at Successive think a lot about those things. So if you're interested in those things, especially the lessons learned part, feel free to reach out to me. Also, we have trainings on AI risk and advocacy and all sorts of things. So if you are interested, please reach out. Again, you can also reach out to my colleague Patrick on these issues. And finally, to introduce Céline's talk a little bit, I want to say that she's going to talk about EU codes of practice for GPAIS, and it's really important because the EU AI Act has a provision that if you adhere to an EU standard or an EU code of practice, it is presumed that you're compliant with the AI Act, at least for those relevant articles. So we can expect many companies to want to adhere to those in order to be compliant. Now I will turn it over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Our second speaker, Professor Céline Castets-Renard, is a distinguished expert and full professor in technology law at the University of Ottawa, specializing in data privacy and AI law. Recently appointed Vice Chair of the EU Commission's Copyright Working Group, she is contributing to the drafting of a code of practice for general-purpose AI systems. A former Fulbright scholar and Yale ISP fellow, Céline also explores the intersection of technology, women's rights, and reproductive justice. With a master's in law from Panthéon-Sorbonne, a PhD in law from Paris Sud, and training at the École Normale Supérieure de Chorchon, Céline brings a wealth of expertise to her discussion of the EU's GPAIS Code of Practice today. Okay, we're just switching over to presentation.
The AI Act, and the goal of this code of practice is going more details, giving more details about how can we implement the AI Act regarding the general purpose AI models. And just to give you a bit of context, as Claire already mentioned it, the code of practice is a part of the AI Act, and the AI Act has been enacted last June. And this is, of course, the European model, the European legislation. And just to give you a bit of this model and of this influence of the impact of the AI Act, I should mention the fact that the scope is broad and broader than the other legislation we could have in the US, for instance, even at the US state level. And this is also broad regarding the material scope and regarding the territorial scope. When you consider the matter of the AI Act, you can see that the goal of this new regulation is improving the functioning of the internal market, because this is the goal of the EU, having and improving the internal market, but more specifically based on AI, on human-centric and trustworthy AI, and ensuring a high level of protection of health, safety, fundamental rights. So this part is very important, because when we talk about mitigation of risk within the AI Act, it means the risk regarding health, safety, and fundamental rights. Also, we can consider that the scope is broad, because the goal is to harmonize rules for the placing on the market, the putting into service, and the use of AI systems in the EU, and also the placing on the market of general purpose AI models. And we are more focused on today, more focused on general purpose AI models. Also, I would like to mention the fact that even if you the provider, the AI provider is established outside of the EU, if these providers release some products, some AI products, and put them into the EU market, it should comply with the AI Act. And you can see that the territorial scope is broad, and we talk about an extraterritorial effect of the AI Act. And more precisely today, my focus is on GPAIS models. And as Claire has already mentioned it, an AI model is a model trained with a large amount of data using self-supervision at scale, and that displays significant generality and is capable to perform a wide range of tasks. And I think this is the most important part of this definition, the fact that a model could could be used and could be retrained for many tasks. And this is something very important for a lawmaker or policymaker, because this is very difficult to focus on specific tasks and specific goals and specific risk if you don't know, if you don't even know what should be the use of your model. And this is something very challenging for the regulators. And this is the reason why at first, the first step of the first version of the AI Act was only focused on systems and specific use of systems. But then after the release of ChatGPT, we understand at this point that the models could have a broad of tasks and a broad of use. And this is the reason why we have had specific provisions regarding models. And these provisions are located within the chapter 5, and one of the main provision within this chapter, it's Article 51 to 55. Article 53 is very interesting because it's focused on transparency and copyright provision, and the two first provisions are very focus really about focusing transparency for national competent authorities, but also transparency for downstream providers. And this part of this provision should be detailed by the code of practice, and the code of practice is organized. The drafting of the code of practice is organized within 4 groups, working groups, and the working group 1 is divided on transparency and copyright. So a part of this working group 1 is focusing currently focusing on these 2 first provisions, and my working group, who's I'm vice chair, is focusing on copyright. So this is the 2 other provisions, C and D of this Article 53(1), meaning putting in place a policy on copyrights, and also giving more details and having a transparency provision according to a template which should be provided by the AI office. And as I just mentioned it, the goal of the working group for drafting the code of practice is giving more details about these provisions. Even if we have annexes 11 and 12, we need to know more about the obligation, the obligation which apply to model providers, and this is exactly our task today. And we also have to comply with Article 56, which is very focused on what should be this code of practice and what should be the mission. And as you can see here, we talk about Article 53(1)(a) and B, and also the rest of the provisions, Article 33 and 35. And this is very important here to understand that what we are trying to do today is giving these details about the summary, about the content, what should be a systemic risk, and what should be the balance between copyright and the respect of rights holders, of course, and the obligation of models providers. And as you can see here, we are 13 independent experts for drafting this code of practice. And the first draft of the code of practice has been released 2 days ago. And this is just the first round, and we will have 3 other rounds. So please, this is still time to contribute, and we really need to have your feedback. So please do not hesitate to write to us, and most important, to contribute within the process of the European Commission. And as you can see here, you can see the topics of the 4 working groups on transparency and copyright. 1, the 2 is about identification, the measure for risk mitigation, and the last one is also on GPAIS, on the governance of AI, and specifically in the models providers. And the final draft should be written and released in April, and for hopefully a validation by the AI board and the European Commission in May, and to entry into force in August 2025. So as I said, the first draft has been released 2 days ago, and I just want to focus on very quickly on the provisions regarding copyright, because this is my part, and we try to have a balance between rights holders and obligations, which applies to models providers. There are provisions regarding the copyright policy, which is included in the AI Act, and we try to give more details about the relationship before and after, what should do a provider. So upstream compliance with dataset providers, and also the downstream providers, what kind of relationship you could build, and what kind of compliance to copyright law you could have. I don't want to enter into the details because I'm running late, I think. And the second main provision and measures we propose is, of course, having a respectful approach regarding copyright and compliance with the TDM exception, the text and data mining exception, which has been created by the directive on copyright digital single market in 2019. And there is an exception regarding the text and data mining, but within two conditions. The access to the data should be lawfully the access should be lawfully obtained, and also the rights holders could express a rights reservation, and this right reservation should be respected. And this is probably the main issue today, having this right reservation and respecting this right reservation, complying with it. And we propose some specific submeasure to try to obtain this compliance. And the last one is about the transparency and revealing what kind of measure the model providers have taken in order to comply with the copyright laws, and specifically regarding the crawler tools used, and also the way to reach them in order to ask for more compliance with copyright law. So as I said, this is just a first draft, this is still a work in progress, and we very welcome all the contribution, all the comments you can make, and so please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you for your attention.
Our final speaker, Richard Mallah, is the founder and director of CARMA, the Center for AI Risk Management and Alignment, where he oversees projects in risk assessment, policy strategy, and technical safety. He also serves part-time as principal AI safety strategist at the Future of Life Institute and has worked at Successive together with Sebastian. With over 2 decades of experience in AI and machine learning, Richard has held roles in research, development, systems architecture, strategy, and leadership, including serving as CTO and chief scientist. A graduate in intelligence systems from Columbia University, Richard will share his insights on a critical missing element in GPAIS regulation, providing valuable perspectives to his essential discussion. Once we see you on the screen, Richard, I think you will be able to start.
Hello all. Let's think back to 14 months ago. 14 months ago, the EU AI Act was still in its finishing touches stages. There was still some lobbying going on, still some discussions, I should say, some education of the European Commission, of other bodies that would be entering the trilogues. And there was some discussion on the types of thresholds that should exist. So there was, oops, let me try to, yeah, sorry. So one of the suggestions that I had tried to make to a relevant body was to have thresholds surrounding capabilities, because when there are high capabilities from a general purpose AI system, there are risks. There are significant harm severities that we might expect from significant capabilities. So 14 months ago, I also had a living friend who I miss very much now, Sebastian, who I had run this concept by, and he had made the great point that lots of different risk assessment frameworks in industry combine probability and severity. And of course, I knew this myself, having a risk assessment, risk management background as well. He did as well in industry. We both had a little bit different exposures from different sets of industries. Both did a little bit of management consulting as well. But yeah, he sort of reminded me, he sort of, gave me a little kick that, plausibility for a given risk pathway is just not enough. It's something that the overall AI safety community was primarily focused on, thinking that if there are existential risks, if it's at least plausible, then it's something to absolutely try to prevent. Now, we found that many folks in industry, many folks in government didn't exactly have that sort of frame of mind. And it was very difficult to convince them to change the entire paradigm with which they think without effectively a first order loss expected value, as it were. So this probability times severity. Fast forward to today. Earlier this year, I had started Center for AI Risk Management and Alignment. One of our primary programs out of our 5 is comprehensive risk assessment. And the primary focus within that has been creating a probabilistic risk assessment for AI, exactly to be able to plug in to this type of need that we've seen, that governments will be asking for, that a variety of different types of stakeholders will be asking for. How do we think about the risks? How do we deal with something that is otherwise quite overwhelming, and be able to start to normalize, in a mathematical sense, what these different possibilities, what these different risks are in front of us? So, as was just mentioned, of 2 days ago, this draft release of the EU GPAIS Codes of Practice, there's this measure 9 of risk analysis I'd like to draw attention to, where in submeasure 9.1, I'll read it out because it's so important. Signatories will use robust risk analysis methods to identify the pathways by which the development and deployment of their general purpose AI model with systemic risk could produce those systemic risks identified, as well as the probability of such risks materializing through those pathways. So even though this is a very short description of what's being asked for in order to satisfy measure 9, they're effectively asking for a probabilistic risk assessment. And to my knowledge, only my organization and Safer AI are working on such frameworks. And we are also in talks to sort of join forces on that. Maybe that's a little early to discuss of how that will look exactly, but we actually also invite others who are interested in that to email. So I'll be sharing an email toward the end, but I'll also say it now, pra@karma.org. So kind of stepping back about what this actual need is that there are ways to think about the overall landscape of risk and just be overwhelmed, to be able to have specific means of being able to prospectively look forward, having a methodology to look forward, is really something that's been a sore need so far. Because really just clicking around, trying things, trying to elicit the various types of risks that might happen are things that have been happening relatively ad hoc, relatively haphazardly thus far, in our opinion, as opposed to trying to get to the overall threat surface, trying to get to the full depth of that threat surface beyond what can just be easily elicited. And be able to think of risk management as really a differential threat assessment for the world is really what's needed here. And having multiple different thresholds that regulators or even companies internally can use in an ensemble method of lots of different types of assessments to get to. So, yeah, with respect to evals, as I mentioned, they don't really get to the full threat surface. What we can do is to actually compare the various types of assessment methods and their strengths and weaknesses. But really what's even better than that is to be able to aggregate them, to be able to use the respective strengths of each type of assessment method and be able to harmonize them into a single framework. And that's effectively what the use of evidence is and the use of argumentation is within the probabilistic risk assessment framework for identifying plausible harm pathways, for creating assessments of the harm severity levels that are plausible from those, and for the arguments for the bands of likelihood levels regarding each of those. So we have released a workbook tool in draft or alpha. One of the primary components of that is a dimension that we call aspects. So it's effectively a taxonomy of hazards that consists of capabilities, affordances, domain knowledge, and harms, where we think of effectively the set of the first three as the broader set of capabilities, as the initiating points that then get to harms as terminal things within a path, within a large network of propagation of those risks through society. And we actually have, as part of this framework, a means of trying to think about the intermediate steps along the way within those pathways. We have a normalized means for assessors to log their respective analyses of the kinds that I mentioned, and a paper will be coming out shortly describing the derivation and usage of this type of framework. So yeah, I am running slightly short on time. I will, however, highlight some of these innovations. So this is a means for doing prospective assessment, as where the vast majority of other assessments, or all of them perhaps, well, I guess with the possible exception of safety cases, which is also somewhat prospective. But most of them are relatively retrospective. But when we have this rapidly accelerating cycle of AI progressing, we really need to be looking forward rather than backward. And therefore, these prospective assessments are really needed. I mentioned about the integration and unification and the modeling of socio-technical context and how these risks propagate. I should also point out that really it's a profusion of threat modeling that we need, because the threat models that have been highlighted so far in the various RSPs and such are a very, very limited set. They were generated by a very limited number of individuals, and there's a large echo chamber whereby people are just copying those and saying things about those, as opposed to getting to the actual broader set of threats from general purpose AI systems and AGI. And really what we need to do is invite people to take a long, hard look at their own systems with the onus on them to explain why or why not various pathways can be expected, and then have auditing of those logs where they try to explain those and try to analyze those and have critiques of those, and being able to point out in a very structured manner why they are missing certain types of risks in their thinking. So yeah, that's an important approach to this. It's a very structured approach to disagreement about the risks. We also provide a very bottleneck-based way to index over the space of these risks. Structured indexing, a structured way to do that analysis and to do that iteration over that space. So we do this because there needs to be agreement about what it is to actually address. And then people can have disagreements about the details in a more productive manner. With respect to hazards, we come at that from a first principles perspective, instead of simply listing the ones that have been talked about in the field at large. But yeah, I invite everybody to take a look at a website regarding this, given that I am running quite low on time. And that is here. Yes. So praforai.github.io/pra. And you can access that also from karma.org. Thank you all.
Thank you, Richard, Céline, and Claire. As we wrap up the Sebastian Lodemann Memorial Lectures on regulating general purpose AI systems, I want to take a moment to reflect on what made Sebastian so special and how we can carry his legacy forward. Sebastian approached everything he did with a rare mix of humility, competence, and kindness. He wasn't just about getting things done, though he did that brilliantly, but about making sure everyone around him felt seen, supported, and inspired to do their best work. He challenged us to think deeply, act thoughtfully, and always keep humanity at the center of what we are trying to achieve. One of the most powerful lessons from Sebastian is that we can be ambitious about changing the world while staying grounded in empathy and care for others. He believed in the power of collaboration and in helping people grow, and he did so with generosity and quiet strength. He also reminded us of the importance of balancing our big ambitions with the small, meaningful moments that make life rich. The best way to honor Sebastian is to live by these values. Be curious, open-minded, and generous. Support each other in making the world better, and never lose sight of the humanity behind the work we're doing. Thank you for being here today to celebrate Sebastian's life and carry on his mission. Let's keep his spirit alive in the work we do and in the way we treat each other. That's a legacy he will be proud of.